On Halloween, I received an invitation to a small party at the corporation's office, of all places. Marsh sent an envelope with a visitor key, along with the short letter of how to reach a hidden karaoke room only a handful of people knew about. I felt flattered that he thought I was special enough to be trusted with such knowledge. I doubted there could be a karaoke room in the office though. This whole thing could be a weird trick he could be playing. The letter also instructed me to eat it after reading the contents, which I did not do. The key to the office was simple. Just put it inside any lock of a door you owned, or received permission to use. It had been said to only open a door to the office's visitor desk, and I would need to sign in when I got there. But I didn't just show up for whatever Marsh planned. I wanted to see how the orchestra was doing. After being exhausted on the last case, it had been sent into the main office for a rest and a tune-up. Nick suggested that I go in to try and cheer up the magic sword, and Matthew worked in that area of the office as well. It would be nice to see him too. I put the key in my apartment door's lock and opened it to an empty check-in area. Closing the door behind me, I looked around to see if I could find anyone at the desk. A sign that said someone would be back in 10 minutes was placed on top of the sign and books. I got started writing my name and the time I arrived. There were a few chairs and a table with magazines near the desk. As I debated on if I should wait, a clicking noise down the hallway caused me to look over. A plump creature walked across the tiled hallway, from one door to another. It sensed my eyes on it and it froze to direct a pale face in my direction. Whatever it was, the thing looked creepy as hell. The small body plump with a fat tail similar to a raccoon. Skinny hands lined its body. For some odd reason, each nail on the claws was painted a different bright color. The face looked almost like a pale human one with raccoonish features. On the side were pouches filled with letters or parcels. We made eye contact and I couldn't look away. "Can I help you?" A voice caused me to jump and scream a little, startling both myself and the receptionist who had just come back from her break. She placed all four jointed hands over her chest in shock and I quickly apologized for scaring her. Her face looked very insect-like, and yet almost cute. Big glasses magnified her reflective eyes. "Sorry, I saw something down the hallway. It was fat," I tried to explain. "Oh, they're just our mail carriers. We hired them at a good deal." As she spoke, her hands got to work moving papers around and starting to sign things. "You're Skylar West, correct?" I was again shocked she knew my name. As far as I could tell, she didn't look down at where I wrote it in the book. Her name tag said Gina, and I don't remember meeting her. I have a good memory. I need to be aware of who all should be able to sign in. Mind you, it's not as if anyone can even walk into here if they shouldn't in the first place. My talents feel wasted. I saw your photo and I'm aware you're a contract worker. You are able to enter only certain parts of the building. What's your main goal today? She sounded pretty pleasant. I found myself liking her. I wished I could hire a nice receptionist like her if my pie firm ever got any bigger. I want to see Matthew. He deals with magic weapons. Marsh also said something about a karaoke room, but I think he's making stuff up. A set of hands got to work drawing a map for me to follow down to where Matthew worked. She shook her head at the mention of the karaoke room, not knowing anything about it. "Here, use this map. It'll get you to the weapons office. As for the karaoke, I have no idea. I've never seen one and don't think some agents could install it without the higher-ups knowing. Then again, someone set up a darts room and a shut-down washroom, so maybe." We both shared a laugh. I accepted the map only to see how complicated it looked. I would never be able to understand where I was going in a building this large. Gina knew that right away. "This place is confusing. How about you use a guide? You have some money for the vending machines, right?" When I nodded, she leaned over her desk to call down the hallway. That fat raccoon creature with all the legs came running down, wheezing as it moved. It stopped in front of her desk expecting something. Gina pulled out a jar of cheese puffs from under her desk to bribe the creature to guide me to where I needed to go. When she tossed down a few puffs and said please, it ate them but ignored the request. She needed to toss down another handful, then said I would buy the little thing something from the vending machine after I was shown the way. That got it going. I found out my new guide was named Bandit, and he sure could run when he wanted. I waved a frantic goodbye and thank you to Gina for all her help. She didn't get too many visitors coming through and acted glad for the distraction. As I tried to stay caught up to the wheezing and running creature, I noticed there weren't too many people in the building. Being Halloween, it seemed likely all the agents got called out on jobs. No one ever told me how busy today might be, but I assumed it could be the most hectic days of the year for them. Even after all my jogging to try to get in shape, I was wheezing just as much as Bandit when we finally stopped. The office door labeled as where I needed to be. A vending machine stood just a few steps down the hallway, so first I would give Bandit what he wanted for doing his job. I placed the change inside the machine asking him what he would like. The creature stretched up to press the buttons himself. For as small as he appeared at first, when he stretched on his back legs, he might be half my height. Like how cats are way longer than you would think. To our dismay, his bag of chips got stuck. I placed some change inside so he could try jarring it loose. When the second bag got stuck, I considered rattling the machine a little. Bandit knew this machine too well. He walked back, got his body in the right spot, and tackled the glass in a way that caused both bags to fall down. He could have known which bags were prone to get struck, causing me to buy him a second one. I didn't mind. I left him to tear apart the bags, spilling crumbs on the floor. I knocked on the weapons office door before going inside. I had really expected the place to be something else. The room looked more like a science lab than a place to create magic weapons. Some sealed glass cabinets were placed along one wall, with swords resting on the shelves. The desks covered with papers, and most of the chairs had been pushed in. Along the other walls stood shelving filled with glass jars. Inside, most held creature body parts. Teeth, claws, and hair were the most popular. The only person inside the room trying to work away sat Matthew, his head raised up, a bit puzzled on what I was there for. "You're the last person who I thought would walk through those doors. What brings you here?" he asked, getting up, his desk covered with half-eaten snacks. His hair and shirt looked a mess, as if he hadn't been out from the office in a while. I was wondering if I could see the orchestra. "I think it might be lonely here," I explained, looking around for it. He walked over to a cabinet and found the key to unlock it. On the middle shelf sat the sword that had saved my life too many times to count. He sat back at his desk as I found a chair to sit with him, the sword inside its scabbard in my lap. It felt a bit warm, and yet tired at the same time. The sword had not yet recovered from whatever wore it out so much. "Here I was thinking you would come and begging me to make you a magic sword," he commented, finding an open chip bag to snack on. "Can you make me one?" I asked, a bit excited, and the orchestra shot out a hint of jealousy. Matthew held out his hand as if expecting something. "Give me the materials for one. You do know what they're made of, right?" I didn't have a clue. I thought they were just made like normal swords, but somehow also magic. When I voiced that idea, Matthew almost appeared disgusted by my lack of knowledge. "Even you should be able to figure this out. What's the first thing you learned about when it came to magic?" He offered patiently. "That it's a life force," I said slowly, trying to follow his train of thought. "That's right. There is a difference between magic weapons. The ones that are called tools are made from supernatural creatures and use up the remaining magic left inside the parts it's made from. Those run out. The sword that is in your hand is special and a rare type. It generates its own magic. Now, why is that?" I had made the mistake of starting a conversation with a magic weapon nerd. This was almost as bad as the time I innocently asked a high school friend about D&D. 2 weeks later, I knew about 6 of his honestly cringy half-elf characters and all the quests he'd gone on, but not how the game worked. Because I started, then the truth clicked into my head, causing me to look down at the sword I held in a new light. "It's alive?" I asked. "That's right. In a way, at least. It doesn't have complex emotions or thoughts, and it doesn't need them. It might not eat and breathe, but magic weapons that create their own power are just as alive as you are. It just has a different mindset and a way of living. It follows the same rules of magic as other creatures. As long as it's alive, the magic grows, causing the older ones to be more powerful. If it runs out of magic, it dies. These types are very difficult to create. Only a handful of skilled people are able to do so. I'm almost able. I just need some more work, but it's hard to come across material to practice with." I listened to him speak and slowly started to clutch the scabbard closer. I knew the orchestra sent feelings and thoughts through, but for some reason I never realized that meant it was alive. Like, really alive. This entire time I'd been using a living thing without really understanding what that meant. My body chilled a little hearing the word materials. What would someone use in order to create a living sword? "By materials, do you mean?" I asked, my eyes looking over to the samples of the creatures on the shelves. An entire body of a creature, not just any creature. One that has a personality that would work becoming a weapon. "You used eel, right? Whatever kind of creature that sword was before it wanted to cut down others. It worked well to be turned into a weapon after their death. The weapon keeps aspects of the person they once were. Agents are given the option to donate their bodies to become weapons after they die, but not a lot check that box. So, if you were able to bring me a body of a creature that would gladly give up themselves after death to be used as a tool, then yeah, I can make you a magic sword." I started hugging the scabbard, trying to mentally speak to the sword. For a moment, I thought it could understand what I was feeling. Nick must have known the truth about his sword. He'd been treating it so kindly this entire time. There'd been a precious partner right in front of my eyes that I didn't give enough thanks to. I figured out why it was so weak. "Here, let me show you." Matthew held out his hands to take the sword, only to have it rattle in the scabbard. I hesitated handing it over. Aside from the sword being picky on who held it, it didn't want Matthew to show me what he discovered. He ignored the clear signs of distress to take it from my hands and turn the scabbard over. A marking I'd never seen before showed clearly under the golden hilt. "This is the brand of the creator." The sword was using a lot of energy to keep it hidden. I have no idea why. Maybe it didn't consent to becoming a sword. I've been trying to look up the name, but only hit roadblocks. The records of who used the orchestra before have been removed, along with 0 mentions of this name. I don't have a clue of what they did to be blacklisted in such a way. As he spoke, I looked at the square branding carved in the black polished wood. A large M and a K took up most of the square with 2 eyes spelling the name Mickey. The only person I ever heard of having their name removed was Nick's old partner, and it was for his own sake. If he heard the name, he risked remembering what led to her death and cracking further. The 2 facts clicked together and I felt as if I just got hit by a truck. Nick kept his old partner's cell phone. It wasn't unthinkable that her sword also got passed along as well. And it gave the orchestra motive to keep the name hidden. Staring at the name, I considered how I might have stumbled into information I shouldn't know. Opening my mouth to bring up the topic, we both froze when the lights cut out. Soon backup lights flickered on as we both sat, dread already sinking in. A drill, I offered, my voice shaking. We don't do drills, Matthew replied. He handed over the sword, standing up when 3 alarms cutting through the entire building made him stop. An intercom came on somewhere, broadcasting to every room. I clutched the scabbard tighter when Gina's voice started to speak. All doors have been breached by unknown creatures. Follow protocol. She stifled a scream as something crashed in the room with her. For a second, the sounds cut out as if she lifted her finger from the broadcasting button. When she pressed it again, all the professional air of her voice dropped. She sounded scared, and yet ready to face whatever might happen. Everyone, please look after each other. Her voice cut off again from crashes and something almost like a body falling to the ground. My eyes flooded with tears that I blinked back, knowing what we just heard. She'd risked her life to warn everyone inside the building. I couldn't focus on worrying about her right then though. I could only do what she told us. Matthew started to lock down the room. He took the orchestra from me to place back inside the cabinet, the locked ones disappearing inside the wall as a defense. We can't use any of these weapons. If we do, they'll crack. At least we can protect them this way, he said rapidly, also trying to distract himself from freaking out. I heard his voice call after me as I raced to the door, looking down the dark hallway for whatever just got inside the office building. I spotted Bandit still at the vending machine. His small body trembled over how frightened he felt. I whispered over to him, opening my arms. He wasted no time to run over to leap into them. Matthew quickly closed and locked the door behind us. What's the plan for this sort of thing? I asked, quickly trying to calm down Bandit. Nothing like this should ever be able to happen. Matthew spoke as he gathered up anything useful in the room. There is a main room in the middle of the building, bottom floor where everyone should meet if an attack does happen. Nothing can get through the doors because it's reinforced by the Silver King's power, along with the outside of this building. Forcing through a single door using a spell or with a key would require such a massive amount of magic I didn't think a creature could ever possess it, to open every single one at the same time. I really don't understand how this is happening. Bandit started desperately trying to get out of my arms, so I placed him on the desk. He snatched up an open snack to eat it nervously for a few seconds. Matthew collected some magic tools he'd finished and hadn't yet gotten the chance to send out. At least if a creature came along, we would be armed. I watched as Bandit jumped up at the shelves, knocking things over, causing Matthew to curse at him. Then we both saw what he was doing. The creature pulled off the grate of an air vent, tossed it aside, and fit his body into it. With some effort, he turned around to face us. I fit, Bandit said in a small, unnerving voice. Oh, that's good. You have a safe spot. Do you think you can get to the meeting room? And do you think you can bring some weapons along with you? Matthew asked. Yes, Bandit and brothers all use this shortcut. I bring good stuff to the big room, he said, his brightly colored claws clicking away nervously. I didn't know how many brothers there were in the building. At least they could ferry small supplies through the vents to the safe room, and he would be safe from the things that invaded the building. The attackers would have no reason to check the vents. I wanted to pet Bandit, but my hand couldn't reach. You're such a brave little guy. Okay, we'll give you a few things. Please pass this plan along with any brothers you might see along the way, I said, causing the creature to nod. We loaded up a bag with some samples, daggers and snacks to hook on his tail and drag through the vents. With that taken care of, we needed to get to the safe room, but I couldn't think about that. I felt more worried about everyone in the office. Abarash and Marsh might be here somewhere. We left the weapons office, debating on whether to lock it. In the end, we left some usable weapons near the door with a note for Bandit not to take them in case an agent came by in need of something. The last thing we wanted was to risk someone dying because they didn't reach a tool in time. Do you know where Abarash's office is? I asked Matthew as we started down the hallway. He handed me a gun, but it only had 6 rounds. The other weapons were 2 extendable batons with stunning magic. Matthew carried a dagger and a small sword. It wasn't much, and we could only hope it would be enough. She's stronger than both of us put together times a million. We don't need to rescue her, he pointed out. That being true didn't change how I felt. So far, we hadn't come across anything trying to attack, but we heard distant fighting echoing from down the hallway. A sudden thought came to mind and I stopped, causing Matthew to as well. His face became angry over it. My heart turned to ice and my hands shook. The daycare, I choked out. He gasped, completely forgetting about it. It wasn't often that agents' children needed to be brought in while their parents worked. But if one child was in the building, they might only be looked after by 1 or 2 agents doing the daycare duties that day. We abandoned our quest to get to a safe room to get to the daycare instead. Matthew knew the building pretty well after working in it for a few months now, so we raced down, unable to think of anything but the possibility of some scared children inside the building being harmed. We came across the first threat when a scream caused us to go off course. We ran down another side hallway determined to help. A very small creature fell to the floor, their hooved ankle bloody. A lab coat draped over their shaking frame as a hulking figure was about to attack. I swooped in, slamming the baton against the attacker's back to a very disappointing reaction. The monster turned to face me, its dead eyes looking down. Matthew had his hands full with 2 smaller attackers that started down the hallway after hearing the scream. The monster moved slowly, but was strong. I dodged a wide punch that destroyed the door it landed on. The creature I faced looked like a buff human with clawed hands. It was some sort of supernatural creature, but it almost looked dead. I knew I wouldn't be able to do much with my batons. Their stunning magic useless against what I was facing. The small creature we rushed in to save started drawing a circle on the ground in their own blood. I made eye contact with her, her big scared eyes glittering and silently begging me to trust her. I needed to hold off this monster until she finished what she was doing. Matthew had trained most of his life for fighting monsters. He might be human, but he knew how to move and use his weapons. He had already taken down one of his attackers with a dagger to the head. What looked to be a normal human fell limp as the other gave him trouble as it ran around on all fours, spitting mad. At least the one I faced was slow enough for me to be able to move around the attacks, as the hallway didn't give it enough space to move. But it was only a matter of time until I got cornered, and one hit from those massive fists would kill me. The girl in the lab coat quickly finished. She cut her long white hair with a box cutter from her pocket, and her spell turned it into a crystal sword. She pushed it along the floor, skidding over in my direction. I dove to grab it before the bigger creature crushed it. Just before he came down on me, I drove the sword up into its skull, its entire body weight coming down on it as it was in the middle of an attack. With all my strength, I moved the creature aside, causing its dead weight to fall away from me. The sword slipped from my grip. I took a moment to pry it from its face, using my foot as leverage. Matthew finished his fight and went over to the small woman, checking to see if she was all right. Aside from her leg and how scared she'd gotten, she was fine. She worked in the office and wasn't a field agent. This kind of situation wasn't something she could handle. Matthew spotted a vent, and with my help we got the grate off. We couldn't carry her along with us, but she was small enough to fit inside the vents. She could take her time to crawl until she came across Bandit or his brothers for directions. She thanked us a few times and I thanked her for the weapon. She broke the news it wasn't very powerful and might break during the next few fights. It was better than nothing, so I told her I appreciated it. When she started safely on her way, we moved along, determined to get to the daycare again. Matthew cursed when he saw splashes of blood along the hallway. The hunters might be the ones doing this. I don't know anyone else who might have enough magic for an attack like this. He cursed again, slamming his fist against the wall when we paused to check if the coast was clear. Everyone in this office treated me kindly, even knowing I was a hunter at some point. I'd killed their kind, and could have even killed someone they knew, and yet not a single one said a bad word about it. There are some monsters in the world that need to be killed, but not a single one works in this office. I could understand why he felt so angry. At some point, he had worked as a hunter, blinded by hatred for supernatural creatures. I still hadn't arrived at my answer of how I felt about some creatures. I knew some ate and killed humans, all while being the kindest and most caring beings you might ever meet. I could understand why a force like the hunters existed, but this was all wrong. Gina did nothing to hurt humans, and yet she could be dead because of them. That short lab worker could have been slaughtered if we didn't show up, and we were still trying to make our way to the daycare. If we didn't make it on time, I didn't know if Matthew would be able to live with himself. The hallways slowly became more gruesome as we moved on. The bodies of some of the attackers lay where they were struck down. Blood from them and the agents that killed them and had moved on made the floor slippery. I nearly threw up from the smell of the blood. The red emergency lights made the entire scene look even more like a horror movie. I kept an eye out for any bodies with suit jackets or lab coats. I really prayed that Nick wasn't in the office for any reason that day. My cell phone useless like it normally was around magic. By some miracle we arrived at the daycare, the door shut and with blood pooled around. It made my heart hurt just thinking about what could have happened before we arrived. Matthew grabbed the door, ready to open it as I raised my gun, thinking now would be the moment to use its limited number of bullets. We whispered to the count of 3, then he threw open the door letting me charge in. A gun went off, but not my own. Something hot cut my shoulder. I kept going, unaware I got just grazed by a bullet. A few small screams caused me to lower my weapon and Matthew raced inside. The back of the room was boarded up with chairs and tables, with magic circles drawn on them for protection. I could hear some kids behind the fort, but couldn't see them. The only other person still standing inside the room looked an agent I knew. The front of his chest was covered in blood. He wavered on his feet and I caught him in time. His suit jacket gone, leaving him unprotected. His gun dropped to the ground as I kept him on his feet by putting his arm over my shoulder. He was a numbered agent, one I've come across a few times before. Another person in a suit jacket on the floor off to the side, face covered with a cloth. I assumed they were the daycare worker who protected the kids until the numbered agent came along. "Hey, we got you. I'm here for you," I said, trying to carrying his entire weight. I'm glad why his voice faded in such an unnatural way it caused my blood to freeze. His body turned limp, dragging me down with him. As Matthew got to work locking the door and checking up on the kids, I helped the agent on his back. I took his hand, flinching at how cold he felt. His nails were painted a sparkling black a while ago, the polish chipped from work. I spotted something on his wrist, a woven red thread bracelet, the one I'd given him. 526. I choked out, placing a hand on his cheek, I wanting him to answer back. A smile still on his somewhat slack face. The sunglasses the numbered agents normally wore were missing, letting me see nothing behind his eyes. This couldn't be happening. I said his name a few more times, slightly shaking his chest and mentally begging for him to respond. He couldn't be gone. I hadn't thought of a good nickname for him or his brothers yet. Movement caused me to look up. 3 kids stood, all scared and huddled together under a bloody suit jacket, none of them fully understanding what was happening. Matthew wanted to get them somewhere safe, but we all were too shocked over the sudden death of the agent who protected them. "Is he taking a nap?" one of the kids asked in a very small voice. They all were about to cry. If they started, I would too. And that would mean all of us would become useless. We needed to be strong and get out of here. I nodded, lying to them. They looked between each other and took off the jacket. I was confused when they handed it over. "We all have blankets for nap time." I nearly choked on tears. They should be keeping it for safety. I then spotted a vent and knew they would be safe without it. I carefully placed his hands over his chest and covered his face with his jacket. We ushered the kids slowly towards the vent. They all knew something bad happened, but not really getting all of it. Some rustling came from the vent after Matthew removed the grate. A different creature poked his face through. The kids cheered his name, saying it was Scooter. We quickly lifted them inside, confident they were going to be fine. I thank God Luna wasn't in the office that day, but was Serval all right? Before Scooter left with the kids, we asked him for an update. The main room was safe. No attackers had reached it before Ankar arrived at the door, guarding it and helping people get inside. He was the strongest in the building and couldn't leave his post. We asked about the names of the people who were confirmed to be the room. Serval just fine. She'd gotten her office workers into the safe room shortly after the power cut out. Abarash was unconfirmed. No word on 706, the other numbered agent I'd interacted the most with. No mention of Nick or Marsh. Bandit still doing runs gathering anything he found useful to drop in the room and leave shortly after. The main issue being as long as the attackers kept the doors open, no one else could use them. The building now completely sealed off. Some information did get in, saying agents were meeting outside the office, unable to break in. We might be safe if we reached the meeting room, but unless someone broke through a door, we all could be starved out. We aren't really the strongest people here. We should start heading towards the safe room, helping along the way. But we can't focus on trying to save everyone. My eyes went over to 526, and then to the fallen daycare worker. My chest ached over not showing up sooner. Having arrived in time for the kids and the female lab worker didn't feel like a victory after losing a friend. A banging on the door made us both jump. Something arrived on the other side, wanting to get in for the fresh blood. If it was an agent, they would have called out. I gripped the sword, ready to face whatever kept slamming on the locked door. Hatred turned my stomach hot. I wanted to kill every single one of these monsters threatening the people I cared about. We may be 2 weak humans, and yet we were ready to take down anything that came our way. The door caved in, the face of the monster on the other side coming into view. With countless fingers slipping through, it widened the opening. A short breath came from its mouth with peeled back lips, revealing pointed teeth. Most of its face looked to be bone, red glowing eyes set in the empty sockets. It walked low on the floor, the body made up of fused together parts of bodies. Matthew spotted the gun 526 dropped. He picked it up, checking the ammo and not finding much left. The thing burst forth, all the limbs making it move insanely fast. Matthew couldn't act fast enough. I took one step in front of him in 526 seconds body, the sword down low until the last second. I was weak. I've known that since the start. My body lacked the power to match the monsters I faced. I couldn't use magic and needed to rely on others. My only real weapon was the strength I gained from how much I cared about my friends and how I wanted to protect them. Standing my ground, I thought about 526, refusing to let my hands tremble. I had the blade of the sword held in front of me as the monster ran face first into it. The monster had been so intent on eating a new victim, it didn't notice the weapon or calculate the blade moving at the last second. The weight of the creature hurt my hand, pushing my body back. My wrist felt as if it might break, gritting my teeth. The emotional weight of losing someone else was nothing compared to the weight of killing this thing before that could happen. "Are you crazy?" Matthew shouted, seeing what kind of risk I'd just taken. There was no time to answer him. More attackers came inside, the quicker ones moving on all fours. 3 came through the open door, dead eyes looking over the room and heading right towards us. My sword still stuck inside the skull of the other creature. The stunning magic would be useless against these things. Matthew shot one, then drew out a dagger to fight it when it got close as the other peeled off in my direction, baton in hand. I waited to attack until it jumped, all its teeth and claws aimed at my throat. The baton magic didn't work, but that didn't stop it from being a blunt weapon. All the frustration and anger from not being able to save someone transferred directly into the creature's face again and again. I didn't let up. The first hit knocked the monster down long enough for the next one to come down and then the next. I kept swinging down as each blow did a little more damage. Its teeth and claws were useless to it now, unable to escape the constant blows. My arm ached and the thing's face caved in. Blood from the vicious attack and tears stung my eyes. When I finally stopped, panting from the effort, I noticed Matthew stood staring. Using the back of my hand, I wiped away some of the blood that sprayed onto my face. "I have a lot of friends in this office. You're one of them. I'm not going to let another one of them die, no matter what," I said between breaths. Slowly, he nodded understanding. We were a pair of weak humans trying to protect supernatural creatures we'd come to care for. Pulling out the sword, we got ready to go back into that blood-covered hallway to face whatever monsters lay ahead. Instead of going to the safe room, we were going to clear each floor looking for anyone who needed help. The office building huge, but only had 6 floors. We were on the middle one. A few more of those quick monsters got in our path, and Matthew was able to take them down himself. Letting him fight alone wasn't ideal as he would tire out soon. Our weapons and strength were limited. If we crossed paths with a vending machine, he broke the glass. He explained that the mail carriers going around the building may come across them and raid them for snacks to bring back to the safe room. Without knowing how long we would be trapped inside, getting food stocked up right away was a good idea. The next big fight went poorly and it was my fault. We came across a hallway that opened up to a waiting area near some elevators. 2 of the larger mixed creatures stood, one lapping up blood along the floor while another got down low to eat the stomach of a dead agent. I saw the suit jacket and my vision turned red. Unable to see the features of the ruined face, I couldn't tell if it was someone I knew. The fact that another agent had died felt unforgivable. Instead of waiting and thinking of a plan, I ran forwards, letting my anger take over my body. Matthew shouted out a warning, trying to get me to stop, but I barely heard him. I raised the sword, ready to take on both of these beasts. The one licking the blood charged, its hands slipping on the blood, letting me slide over it and drive the blade into the skull. The other raised a head and Matthew shot its skull, bullets bouncing off as it moved. I raised my arm too late to block it. The hard forehead made contact with my arm, causing it to crack back, smashing my nose at the same time. My body tossed down the hallway, my head dazed and my arm throbbing. The creature turned its head, blood and gore dripping from the bone face. Gaining traction, it ran along, its mouth a horrible pit ready to engulf me. My luck almost ran out.